The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the producer and those appearing in this show and do not necessarily represent the views of DerryCam, the town of Derry, or any of its staff or affiliates.
Hi, I'm Anthony Henry. Welcome back to America's Ass. We are on episode 19. Long day of school today, kind of rainy. I didn't like the weather, but I'm here now, so I'm happy. And today we have our guest representative, Steve Pearson of Derry, with us. So
thank you, Anthony.
Please take a minute to tell the audience about yourself.
Okay, sure. Well, Representative Steve Pearson, I grew up here in Derry. I'm a 1994 Pinkerton graduate. When I left Pinkerton, I went off to Oklahoma State University and got an engineering degree in fire protection. Came home and was recruited to come back for a new master's program. It's a Master's of Public Administration and Emergency Management. I completed that. 99% of that came back here. Began my career with the Manchester Fire Department, and I work for the City of Manchester still 20 plus years working for the fire department.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, the first big topic would be Kevin McCarthy has recommended an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. This has been something we've been wondering if it would happen, and many of the big names, such as Senator Tom Cotton, for example, are getting behind it and saying that they will vote for it. So what are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, you know, impeachment is something that is not a minor act. And one of the things that I think that people need to understand is impeachment is kind of like getting yelled at by your grandmother in a way. It's a reprimand. Bill Clinton was impeached when he was in office for lying during a grand jury investigation, and was disbarred actually as a result of that. You know, we've seen it before with impeachment trials. They're messy, they're hyper-partisan, and in this particular case, you know, I would hope that our elected representatives are not just doing this for a futile effort, but do have grounds for such an action.
Yeah, and I think that was what much of the Republicans' concern was when Trump was impeached, both times, because a lot of that was politically motivated. It can be argued if the evidence was real or if it was partisan motivated.
Sure, and you know, like I said, impeachment, you know, there's this idea that, well, it'll be removed from office. Removal from office is a whole nother animal after impeachment convictions. You know, and that bar for removal of office is even higher than just the reprimand, if you will, the political reprimand. So, you know, these are not something to be taken lightly, and it's certainly action that is very serious, and you know, the American public is going to watch this unfold in real time, and in most cases judge for themselves.
Yeah, and besides Trump and Bill Clinton and possibly Biden now, the only other time that an impeachment has happened was President Andrew Johnson back in the 1860s. He was Lincoln's vice president and then took office when Lincoln was killed, and he was just not a good person, not just for some of his views on slavery, but he would show up to meetings drunk sometimes. He would just, you know, be jerky to everyone. He was pretty corrupt, and he only lost impeachment by one vote in the Senate. One person away from being removed from office, and no president has been removed from office fully through impeachment. I think that's important to note. The House impeaches, and then the Senate convicts, kind of as the final judge. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
See who doesn't get behind it too.
Sure, you know, and this is the part where, in the preliminaries, the jockeying for position, the political wrangling, you know, as we know, the current Speaker of the House became Speaker of the House through some compromise and through some trade-offs to get the vote. Now, you know, we're not all privy to the negotiations and the political wrangling that went on to make that happen, but it seems as though there have been some statements by some other reps to say, hey, wait a minute here, this was part of, what we were talking about here to make you Speaker of the House. So it sounds like there are, all the members of the House are looking at, this issue and how it affects them, not only in a overall effort in the House as a body, but back with their own constituents in their districts as well.
Yeah. And another more minor piece of news, but I think it connects with this somewhat because he was very involved in the last 2 impeachments with Trump. Senator Mitt Romney has announced that he will not be running for re-election, which is big news in the Republican Party because a quote-unquote rhino will be retiring. So that's big.
One of the things, there's two things with that. Anytime someone announces that they're not running for office and becomes a lame duck, if you will, that 2 things happen. One, you see how things change because now this person is not necessarily someone you're going to have to deal with in the future, but also in a lot of cases, someone's true colors come out.
Yeah.
In the sense of, now that they're not beholden to re-election, maybe their philosophies switch a little bit. I'm anxious to see what Governor Sununu is going to do with that, as an example of someone who's now a lame duck political person. So, as far as Mitt Romney goes, I'm personally not a big fan of the term rhino, in the sense that it is not a unification word for the Republican Party. It's very divisive, and I think it's extraordinarily overused.
Yeah.
Extraordinarily overused. So
I agree with that.
And I mean that generally, not specifically to Mitt Romney.
Yeah, and there are some people that are kind of rhinos that definitely should not be Republicans. There's some in Derry, you probably know who I'm referring to. But yeah, I think the word rhino has become a weapon lately, just to throw at another Republican if you don't like them for whatever reason. And I think that certain people in the party should stop using it so liberally.
Well, the other thing too is, as with any other label, if it's thrown out willy-nilly, it loses its definition. The definition becomes fluid. It becomes morphed into whatever the person receiving that thinks it is. And if it's overused, it loses all of its meaning, frankly, because people, oh, geez, really, rhino, really, and it doesn't take much. It only takes a few examples of that being thrown around in more of a weaponized way, and not being applicable for people to go, what does that mean? What does that word really mean? So, so as a general in the House of Representatives, we don't, most of us just avoid that word. It just doesn't have any value.
Yeah, and keeping with New Hampshire, but switching topics, many of you remember a couple episodes back we were talking about Trump possibly being taken off the ballot in New Hampshire because Corky Messner, the former Senate candidate, had a meeting with Secretary of State Dave Scanlan about it, and Secretary Scanlan announced today that he will not be removing Trump from the ballot in New Hampshire.
Secretary Scanlan is a friend, is a guy that I've worked with for 6 years now, when he was a deputy secretary under Bill Gardner, and he's an honorable man. He's a very, very thorough guy, takes his job extremely seriously. It was a no-brainer for me to vote for him, just so you know, and you'll see these commercials occasionally in Massachusetts. The Secretary of State runs for office, is elected by the people. In New Hampshire, the Secretary of State is elected by the House of Representatives. So it's a little bit different way of doing things. It really, forces, we have to look at, this is a very serious job. Secretary of State's a very serious job. And it involves a multitude of very serious things that happen within the state. Not only just from the corporate side, right? I mean, if you were to form a business, you have to go through the Secretary of State's office, but they handle elections. So, you want somebody in there that's going to do a job that's fair, it's impartial. Our prior Secretary of State was there since my birth, really, 1976, and you would ask people, well, what's his political affiliation? And most people couldn't tell you, and that means the Secretary of State was doing his job. Because if you don't know, if it's not obvious, then they're doing what they should be doing. And Dave Scanlan does exactly that. So, the idea of removing Trump from the ballot simply for the court of public opinion or the media frenzy or the whims at the time is highly inappropriate, right? I mean, in order to disqualify someone for office, they have to be convicted of that. And it can't just be rhetoric. And of course, that hasn't occurred yet. So there's no grounds. The American people will decide what fate Donald Trump has within his political career. And that's ultimately where it should stand.
And it will be in the courts too. There has not yet been a trial in the courts, the several courts that Trump is being tried in.
The funny thing about trials, right? So anybody that's puts on trial in this country is allowed to defend themselves. And they're allowed to bring forward evidence to do so. And I think it's going to be very interesting when that happens to see what really is brought forward here. You get the CNN soundbite or the quick little blip or whatever, or the 10-second clip of a speech that was given. But when you actually look at the entirety of the speech that was given by him in D.C., the things that he said were no different than speeches that were given by other people that have given speeches. Martin Luther King is an example. There's parallels to both their speeches. They're certainly not plagiarized. They're not exactly the same track. But throughout the course of this, Donald Trump's defense, the president's defense, is going to be able to bring forward a holistic view of that and not just the little sound snippets. So, that's going to be something that the American people are going to get to see, certainly. And of course, the courts are going to have to rule on facts, evidence, and the law, and not just media spin.
That's very true. The media trials are a lot different than actual trials. And on the Secretary of State, who I've met, and I agree with you, he's an amazing guy, very nonpartisan. So another thing he's been doing, which you may have heard about, the first in the nation primary. He's been a big advocate for keeping it first in New Hampshire, making sure the Democratic National Committee does not change it. And yeah, it looks like we'll be going forward with it. I'm sure the DNC is going to fine us or something. Who cares?
The reality is that he, in a way, doesn't have a choice, right? So the first in the nation primary is law in New Hampshire. It's not an opinion. It's not a tradition, although it started with that. It's actually codified into law. So the Secretary of State is bound to uphold the law. And in this particular case, they're going to do so. And that's, one of the things that it's not just about the idea of candidates coming down to any local dairy restaurant or the folks that are stumping, within the borders of a relatively small geographic state. For us in New Hampshire, the way that we do this is unique to other places, and it forces candidates to get down in the trenches, to put boots on the ground, to meet people, to show the folks in New Hampshire their true colors. And on the flip side of that, there is a substantial economic factor that ties into this. And frankly, I don't know that we would have Channel 9 in Manchester if we lost the first in the nation primary.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
Aside from that whole thing and their, the media coverage that comes with that, let's face it, New Hampshire's got almost, our electoral votes are like this compared to, say, California or New York or Texas.
Yeah.
So how do we become relevant in a state that really electorally may be considered irrelevant? And this is the only way. So, I think we've done a good job. It's disappointing to hear some of the things from the DNC as far as the labels that have come across New Hampshire. We're to this, we're to that, we're to whatever. And frankly, a lot of that, if you look, if Joe Biden had not lost New Hampshire, would we even be having this conversation? Is this really about the fact that he took 4th place in New Hampshire?
Yeah, and he's been very much for the primary being changed to South Carolina,
where he happened to finish first.
and where he happened to have his election chances saved. So we'll close that, but another big topic, which you may have heard about if you're a gun fan, the governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, has done an interesting thing and decided to suspend constitutional carry. So I'll let you go first.
Imagine this, okay? Imagine a governor came in and suspended a woman's right to vote, or a governor came in and suspended the fact that we abolished slavery, or a governor came in and abolished freedom of the press. That would never fly, right? Holy cow, that would be beyond shocking. So to take any of those articles and suspend them, first of all, I don't think a governor has a right to do that, certainly. I think that this is going to the courts really fast.
Yeah.
And frankly, shocking that would even be something that you would entertain, you know, and the Bill of Rights is you know, it's a large van full of your children, right? None of them are really your favorite, and none of them are ones that you're just going to drop off on the side of the road and drive away from. So to single that one out, I mean, like I said, imagine if she had picked a different one.
Yeah. And I know that wouldn't fly in New Hampshire if it were here.
No.
Absolutely not.
Not at all. You know, and frankly, I don't know that would fly in Maine, and I don't know if that would fly in Vermont. In some of the other states that have constitutional carry, there's, you know, what's the justification?
I believe the reason she gave was that there was a shooting at a school or something, and she decided that it was like a public emergency. I believe that's what she said.
I'm not exactly. I didn't follow specifically statements that she's made with that, but you know, it's unfortunate that people are human, and people do unfortunate things, and they do it in a variety of ways. And in an open and free society, we do have to balance liberty and safety, and that's always been the case since the beginning.
And I think New Hampshire has done a really good job at that. We're one of the safest states in the country.
That we are, and you know, there was a lot of rhetoric and a lot of concerns when Vermont went constitutional carry, and which was surprising to a lot of folks that a state like Vermont would do that. But again, same thing. Vermont did it, and 28 states have now done it. This is, you know, and it's funny that we're even having a conversation in reference to that. You know, you look back at the beginning. Not being able to speak for the founding fathers, but I think, based on their writings, their opinions, that they would be shocked at all. What do you mean you have states that have constitutional carry and states that don't? It's Article 2. Why are we having this discussion? But
frankly, I think they'd be shocked at a lot of what's going on in this nation.
Sure, and it's you know, it's interesting to read about, you know, things that were going on at the time and how that all related in the context of what was going on. And obviously, you know, history continues to move forward. The United States moves forward, but the fundamental basic ideas that created us and made us basically who we are have not changed. And that is, you know, and if we ever get to the point where they do change, then this country has lost itself. So, you know, New Mexico, I would say, is, I wouldn't even call it concerning. I would just, you raise an eyebrow and go, really? You're going to put this through the process of going to the Supreme Court? We already know what the answer is going to be to this, you know, and really, what did you ultimately do? What did this accomplish for you? And I think, frankly, in New Mexico, it's going to make things worse for them, not better.
I agree. So anyway, we're out of topics, so now we get on to you. What are you doing up at the State House?
Wow, okay, so what's going on in Concord that you might want to know about? We have a couple of crises occurring that have really, one of which has been touched on, well, they've both been touched on the media, but very, very briefly. A lot of folks may not realize the state prison system right now is pretty much staffed by the National Guard. That is not the National Guard's job. And especially when the National Guard, remember, National Guard folks work somewhere else. They have jobs, they have families, they're not, this is really not what they're for. But because of changes that were made within the state, some of them that were very politically motivated, we basically, no one wants to do that job. And it's unfortunate. I'm very familiar with what corrections officers do. My brother happens to be a corrections officer in the state of New York. And we have a very, very serious problem right now in the state prison. That's one. So we're trying to address that issue. There have been talks from the National Guard that those folks may be getting deployed. So now what do? We certainly aren't going to let everybody out of jail. So that's something that needs to be addressed desperately. And to tie into that, we are currently 80 state troopers short. 80. We are advertising as far west as Ohio. Come to New Hampshire, be a state trooper. We shouldn't have to do that. The fact that we've gotten to this situation is shocking. And the sad part is there are people in Concord that just don't want to address it. So, public safety is always a concern in New Hampshire, and this issue has got to be addressed. It has to be addressed. So we're looking at that issue. We have the issue of the Hampstead Hospital going on right now.
I've heard a little bit about that, not too much, though.
So it's a mental health facility, and the Hampstead Hospital, the Sununu Center shut down, and the Sununu Center obviously had some very, very serious problems that should have never, ever got to anywhere near where they're at. So that facility being shut down, we still need to help these people. We still need to provide the necessary care that's needed. And the Hampstead Hospital facility has been chosen to do that. So I'm certainly monitoring that as we border Hampstead and the various concerns that go along with that as well. So that's a couple of things that are ongoing right now.
Yeah.
We don't normally in the summertime, right? So the legislature really kind of takes a break. We have subcommittee hearings and some statutory committee meetings that will occur. And one of the things that we also typically tackle is veto day. So, and that's where if the governor vetoes something that comes to his desk, it comes back through the process, back to the House and Senate, where we have the ability to vote to decide to override said veto. The President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House have determined none of those vetoes are earth-shattering and have decided to put veto day in January. So that's just great. So that's what's going on, in Concord right now. It's summer break, and we're going to kick back into this full swing again in January. Right now it's filing period, so we have till Friday to file legislation for the upcoming term, and it's a very short window for some reason this year, and then the whole process starts again.
So in the state legislature, there's really two kind of distinctly different years, because on the odd number years, they do the budget mostly.
Correct.
And not as many bills. And in the even number years, there's not really much budget at all, and it's a lot of bills. So to put it to you in a kind of an easy way, right? The first year involves bills that cost money, right? So we can figure out how the state can process that and squeeze that all into the budget. In the second year, it's more about policy. It's more about language cleanup. It's changing little things that aren't really monetarily based. So, but not necessarily. I mean, the state has $453 million of surplus right now. And when you have surplus money to that effect, there are some things that we can accomplish. As an example, a bridge that might be bonded, right, where we're going to pay a bond and pay interest for 20 years. We now can pay for that for cash. Ultimately, that saves the taxpayer a ton of money when you're not bonding things. So, we're looking at one-time projects. We're looking at fixing, like I said, some problems that we have within the emergency services, and and the whole wrangling of all of that begins
It's already begun, really.
Yeah, yeah. So, and on Hampstead Hospital, I've said it on the show before, mental health is the biggest crisis in America. And I think the state needs to do a better job at addressing that. So I'm glad to hear that stuff's happening with that.
I agree. The former chairman of Health and Human Services and the current chairman of Children and Family Law in the House is heavily involved. He's a representative out of Hampstead. I certainly work with him a lot on some of these issues, not simply because he happens to be my father, but he does represent District 34. So we have the unique distinction currently of being the only father-son combination in the United States serving in a legislative body. But you know, we are in two different districts, and we look at things from a little bit different perspective. And especially when it comes to Hampstead Hospital, you know, with him looking at that, you know, from a Hampstead standpoint, which is really matters, I'm looking at more of, okay, well, Derry's next door, and you know, what kind of resources moving a facility like that to Hampstead is what's that going to mean? And you know, we obviously want that facility to be functional, to be safe, to do what it's intended to do. And you know, the days of burying our head in the sand when it comes to the mental health crisis are over. I serve as a vice chair of the PTSD Commission. You know, we're looking at that from a PTSD standpoint as far as first responders and some of our military folks and what that entails. And then, you know, just the overall tie-in between, and it's so complicated, but the tie-in between homelessness, mental health, addiction, you know, and that holistic look at what that does, you know, from a societal standpoint and from the allocation of resources to dealing with that.
Yeah. So we are just about out of time, so feel free to give a closing statement.
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show, fellow Astro. It's I'm happy to be here. This is a wonderful facility, and you know, I just to let the people of Derry know that, you know, we are, the 10 of us, the 10 state reps, are really actively working in the various roles that we have up in Concord. It's, you know, you don't necessarily always see it, but we got boots on the ground. We're up there, and we're fighting for Derry and the state tooth and nail here. So, you know, if you see us, say hi, drop us an email if you have concerns, certainly. And you know, like I said, thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on. And on Pinkerton, you are on the alumni board. I don't know if you mentioned that.
I am on the alumni board of directors. Yes, I am. Yeah.
And I just started my post. My first meeting was yesterday as the Pinkerton Academy liaison to the Derry School Board. I'm really excited to be doing that. It's been really interesting so far.
Best of luck with that.
Yeah. They're an interesting group, the school board. But anyway, I'm Anthony Henry. This has been America's Ass. Thank you for watching.